go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's around 12:35, so we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully people kind of keep on coming in. I am so happy to have Andrea Chung here with us today to talk about your work. And just to let everybody know, this session is being recorded. And the Art Stockings lecture series are available at the Smith College Museum of Art YouTube channel within a nice time frame. So if you want to reference anything, they're available there. Andrea is joining us from San Diego, California, and you received your Bachelor of Arts from Parsons School of Design in New York and a Master's from Maryland Institute of College of Art in Baltimore, and has shown extensively nationally and internationally, and has such an amazing breadth of work, both materially and in subject and approach, and I'm just so excited to have you with us today. It's been such a long week, and we were kind of just talking in the intro about just everything that is happening right now, and kind of on the day after the George Floyd verdict, and even within like 10 minutes, Ma'Khia Bryant losing her life to the police. I think that we're sort of just in this time where we're making and we're moving through and we're talking about our work, and there's just everywhere you look, there's sort of something else that is sort of reminding us of all the very prescient things and work that we have to do. But yeah, anyway, so I'm just in one of those moments today where it's wonderful to be with people and to talk about work, and also recognizing how hard sometimes everything feels. So Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you and have you.
Ooh. Oh, is the audio working? You kind of chopped in and out.
Oh, that's just me accidentally hitting my mute. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. And I do want to say that I do want to acknowledge the fact that, we did get a guilty verdict, but, only 15 minutes later, it's happening all over again. So I hope that people will remember to continue protesting. All right. You guys can see my screen, right? Sorry, there's a bug flying in my face. So I'm going to briefly start with some grad work, just so you can get a sense of my practice. When I was in grad school, I started off as a painter, but I don't paint anymore. I just don't really feel that painting really allows me to talk about colonialism in the way that I'd like to discuss it. And I just realized I didn't have the passion for it the way a lot of my peers did. I also don't care about the history of painting in terms of Western art. It's been shoved down my throat for so long that I don't really care. It doesn't encompass the rest of the world and talk about things happening concurrently. So I was trying to find a material or a medium that satisfied what I wanted to say. And I started looking at a lot of archival materials, and I found a lot of these images that have been used to talk about slavery in the Caribbean, but they are actually not images of slaves. They are images of laborers that were asked to pose. So when slavery was abolished in the British colonies, due to the fact that the sugar industry collapsed, they decided to move to tourism. So a lot of these photographs that you see are constructed by photographers in order to make white European tourists and American tourists feel safe enough to come to the islands. So in a lot of these images, you'll notice that any signs of technology has been erased. There have been photographs where they've erased electrical wires that you might see. Also, the landscape is always in a very neat and orderly sort of way. All the objects are organized. And usually the figures, which are Black figures, are often in subservient positions, such as sitting or bending over, and always of service to the person that's, gazing upon them. So I wanted to find a way to honor their labor. So I decided to give them the day off. So I used an X-Acto knife and cut the figures out of their environments. And the way that these are generally shown is that they're off the wall, about an inch off the wall, so that they cast a shadow. And in Jamaica, we would refer to those ghosts as duppies. So I kind of see these as like haunting images and duppies that are there, and asking the viewer to sort of consider who's been removed and why, and really taking a look at the landscape and the objects of their labor. And Mayday is just sort of referencing Labor's Day, and also like Workers' Labor's Day, and also a distress signal. So this image is taken by a photographer named Dupperly. He is one of the main people that took these itinerant images, and that's actually him on the right-hand side. And I decided to leave him in the image because he looks like an overseer to me. And again, the figures are in subservient positions, doing things that they wouldn't naturally do. Like one of the figures was chewing on the sugar cane, laying down, sitting down. These are not things that would happen. So then I started looking at more contemporary images of tourism, focusing in the Caribbean. And I was researching this magazine called Caribbean Life and Travel. And it's been around since the 70s and went out of print in 2012, I believe. And again, noticing that the Black figures are still bending over, still in subservient positions, still serving a white audience. So again, removing the figure. This piece is called Dexter has a new definition of sublime. And again, this time I'm also playing with the copy that's in the magazine, not changing anything, but trying to bring attention to some of the things that are being sold and advertised. And then I started looking at more iconic and historic objects of tourism. So this is a really, really famous poster of a woman in a wet T-shirt that says Jamaica across her chest. And I was really interested in this one because I had grown up seeing this everywhere, plastered on every man's wall or every teenager's wall. And the funny thing is that the woman is actually not even Jamaican. She's from Trinidad, and her name is Sina Bronte, and she was forced to sign a contract saying that she would never disclose that she was not actually Jamaican. So she was hired by an American photographer that was working with the Jamaican Tourism Board. So I want you to really think about what's being sold here. This is sort of advertising sex tourism, and it's not something that you would see coming from Germany or France or any other white European country. They're not advertising naked women in there. Hey, I have a talk. Sorry, my son in the background. You can keep your pants in your room. This is what it's like to be a mother and an artist at the same time. So I'm just going to let you know that now. So I think it's interesting that promoting the island in this way, in ways that, like I said, you don't see European countries advertised, and not considering that there is an HIV high rate there, thinking about COVID and how it was people who came into the island that brought that virus, and then it, spread. And it's an island that doesn't have the resources that we have here in the States. So, they'll probably be one of the last people to get a vaccine. And I don't think people consider the damage that they put on not only the individuals there, but also the land. In Jamaica, there's something called rent-a-dread, where white foreign women, usually from England and France, and sometimes the US, will go down there and have a boyfriend for the time that they're there. And I've also seen like a lot of much older white men that will come there with girls that are obviously underage. And that would never happen here. And I find that guests behave in ways that they wouldn't at home, and they forget that they are a guest. When you go to another country and you're visiting, you are a guest, and these are not ways that a guest would behave, in your home. So I left the copy the same. The only thing that I changed was capitalizing the O in other. And for this piece, I was thinking a lot about housekeepers in hotels. So I actually used bleach and sprayed it on the piece. And I hadn't looked at the piece in about like 10 years. And I took it out for a show I was doing here. And I had noticed how much it had sort of deteriorated over time. And that has become a huge element in my work, is allowing the material to deteriorate on its own and to have its own history. So this is an animation that I made based on an iconic commercial that I've seen, growing up as a child. So I'll play it first and then I'll talk about how I made it.
Come back to Jamaica.
Come back to gentility.
What's old is what's new.
Come back to our beauty.
We want you to join us.
Come back to our people.
We made it for you.
Come back to hospitality.
So make it Jamaica.
Come back to our bounty.
Make it your own.
Come back to tranquility.
Make it Jamaica.
Come back to romance.
Your new island home.
Come back to the way things used to be. Make it Jamaica again, and make it your own.
Make it Jamaica, your new island home.
That's not problematic. So I actually originally found this on YouTube. There's a lot of commercials like that talk about come back to the way things used to be. And that was a slogan that had been used for at least 10 to 15 years. Now it's come back to yourself, which is also problematic. So for this piece, I printed out all the frames at 12 seconds per frame. So it was about 908 frames. And then I hand cut out all the figures and then scanned them back in and reanimated it and then add the audio. And it was a really laborious project to do, but I wanted my labor to be a way to honor their labor as well. It can't replace the labor that they did in the hard work and the things that they suffered for their labor, but it's just my homage to honoring that labor. And also, if you look at the video, it's every single stereotype that's ever been created to talk about Black folks. So you have the Uncle Remus figure at the end with the children. You have a mammy figure. The market woman is a very common stereotype in the Caribbean, the market woman and the washerwoman. You have the exotic beauty. So I thought it was really interesting that the perpetuation of these stereotypes and also telling you to come back to the way things used to be and really asking you to question, what are you selling and what are you asking us to come back to? And clearly it's a time of colonialism and slavery. I was invited to do a residency in Philadelphia, working with the printmaker. And this time I decided to look at the objects of their labor, and again, playing with the idea of the duppies. So I actually embossed them into the paper this time and used the copy that I had found in various advertisements, still from the same magazine. But instead of sandals, I created my own resort called Thongs, just being kind of tongue in cheek. So some of the text says, do you ever dream of a place completely unspoiled by the ravages of time, unspoiled, uncommon, unpretentious, and fortunately completely unchanged? So again, asking you to, don't you dream of going back to a time when you have these servants that are providing your every need or your every whim? So it's a suite of 6 prints meant to be shown all together. And later on, I think later on that year, I had gone back to Jamaica with my family and my husband. And I went specifically knowing that I wanted to find these sculptures that they sell at the craft markets there. And craft markets are basically for tourists, and they're usually in high tourist areas. So like Negril or Mobe or Ocherius. There's one in Kingston as well. And I grew up seeing these sculptures. They're usually made by artisans who live in the country, and they're commissioned by the tourism board to make like trinkets, souvenirs, and things like that. And some of these are life size. I've seen some like driving through the country, like they're selling them on the side of the roads. And they're always exaggerated penises. There's actually one that has a barrel around them, and you pick up the barrel and his penis is on a spring, so it bounces up and down. And in talking to, some of my other Caribbean friends from different islands, they all told me that this is something that they sell there as well. So you see this common, sexualizing of the Black body in pretty much every island within the Caribbean. So for this, I decided to cast the figure out of sugar and allow it to melt over the duration of the exhibition. And this was in 2013. So this was, I think I let it melt for a month. And it was during the summer, but it was an air-conditioned space. And what I loved about it is that it attracted all the dust and all the debris in the air. Sorry, my child is trying to sneak in. I did a residency at the McCall Center, and once I graduated from grad school, I had gotten a Fulbright, and we went to Mauritius, which is a small island nation in the Indian Ocean. It has a very similar history to the Caribbean. It was a sugar colony. It was colonized 3 times by the Dutch, the French, and the British. And I went there to study food as a way to talk about migrations into the island. So my last name being Chung, my grandfather was from China. He was Hakka, and the same Chinese indentured servants that came to Mauritius were also Hakka. So it was kind of a cool reckoning of like meeting other Hakkas and learning how to cook some of the food. And all of the Caribbean, all of the Chinese that migrated to other parts of the Caribbean were also all Hakka. All of the Chinese that are in San Francisco are all Hakka as well. They're known as being a nomadic group, speaking their own language. So when we were in Mauritius, I was really interested in a particular location called Lemourne. During slavery, there were Maroons that established a village on top of Mount Lemourne. And when slavery was abolished, British troops were coming to recapture some, but to also let them know that they were free. And they all jumped off the cliff. And one of the ways that they sustained themselves was through fishing. And it became a generational trade that was passed down through families. And there's a stereotype being that all Creoles that fish were the descendants of slaves. And Creoles are generally what they refer to as anyone that is Black or Christian. And while we were there, my husband was fishing with a lot of people. And one of the things that they did was line fishing. They had access to rods and reels, but they would use bottles instead and wrap the line around the bottle and use different things as weights like nuts and bolts or rocks. And they would tie it to the line and then cast it into the water. And then you hand pull it up. And right now, their fishing trade is dying out because there are a lot of foreign boats that are coming into their waters and stealing their fish. And there's also a stereotype of Creoles very similar to the way Black folks are spoken about here as being lazy and savage, uneducated. So I was really fascinated by the similarities in which that we are all spoken about. So for this, I decided to cast the bottles out of sugar and allow them to melt over a duration of time. I was lucky that I had a thermostat in my studio, so I could, play with how quickly things melted. I played with the temperature and how I cooked things. And it's just to sort of mirror the disappearance of their trade and the way that they decided to, sustain themselves. I saw it as a revolutionary act because once the plantations started to crumble, they were supposed to do a 7-year apprenticeship and they refused to do it. And they decided to be fishermen, to continue on with this tradition and as a way to sort of sustain themselves. And one of the things I want to point out is that I am a lover of failure and mistakes. It took me a really long time to figure out how I wanted to tell the story and how to actually cast these bottles. Because again, I started off as a painter and I have not had like a single sculpture class in my life. I've had various friends teach me how to do certain things. I think this was 2013, and actually somebody came into my studio and got stuck to one of the hooks and pulled all of the piece down. So all these broken pieces on the ground, I didn't do that, but I thought that it really went well with what I was trying to say. So I decided to keep it like that. And every time I show this piece, I always break pieces and scatter them around the space. And I just love embracing accidents and failures because they teach you quite a bit. And I don't think that the installation would have been the same had I let everything, suspend so perfectly. And also like trying to not fight with the material. Sugar is a really hard material to work with. I used to want to make it permanent and never melt and just really fighting against the qualities of it. And now I sort of embrace the materiality of what it does and allow it to have its own life and its own history. And I think this piece is what really turned me on to only working with ephemeral materials. So again, these are just details. And time is still a very big part of the work. So every time I install this, it always looks different, which makes it more exciting and fun to do. And again, going along with the same story of Lemoine, this time I decided to cast boats out of sugar and put them in a bath of water. And over the duration of time, they slowly melt. In this instance, it was 102 degrees, so they melted rather quickly. But I've shown this in Oslo, where it's much, much colder and it lasted a lot longer. So these are just detail shots. And I love that I couldn't predict what was going to happen to the water. It's all a learning experience. And I think that's more exciting for me as an artist. I don't want to know immediately how it's going to turn out. I want to see, what the material decides it wants to do today. And I like that it doesn't last forever because I don't think all art needs to. And it's kind of my middle finger to the art market in a lot of ways, because the first thing people ask me is like how do you sell it? And just wanting to constantly commodify the work when some things don't need to be sold. I would prefer that my work be used in a more educational way. So I focus more on institutions than I do private collectors for that reason. So I did research in Jamaica with a professor from Pitzer College. Her research was really fascinating. She focused on midwives from the South, Black midwives from the South. And modern day obstetrics is based off of research that white doctors did, learning how to deliver babies from these Black midwives. And they were generally older women who felt they had a calling from God, and they serviced women in rural areas that had no access to any kind of health care. And once these doctors learned from them, they then banned them from being able to practice, stereotyped them as being dirty, and they had to write letters in order to be, certified, and had to follow very specific rules set by these white doctors in order to continue practicing. And there's a term called catching babies that's used to discuss the actual physical delivering of the child. So we decided to go to Jamaica and do a comparative study to see if there were any similarities between the two practices. And we interviewed in the States, they're referred to as granny midwives, the quote unquote untrained lay midwives. And in Jamaica, they're referred to as nana midwives. And my grandmother was a midwife as well. So I just was really interested in this. And we interviewed midwives. We interviewed people who had been birthed by midwives. We interviewed people who are midwives within the medical system there. It's very different. The medical system is structured more in a British format. So midwives are actually the ones who deliver the babies in hospitals, and the doctors just come in briefly. But Nana midwives delivered babies in rural areas. Again, older women calling from God. They oftentimes had apprentices. They took care of the mothers during pre and postnatal care. So they functioned very much the way that a doula functions now. They prepared food for the mothers, provided them medicinal teas to help with things like red raspberry tea was used to speed up their labor. And we started to notice that there were a lot of African retentions in both practices. So one of the things that would happen, other than the herbs that were used, they would put sharp objects under the bed, and that was to cut their labor pains. They would tie red strings around the baby's wrists or put them in red stockings, and that was to ward off evil spirits. The mothers aren't supposed to leave the house for 9 days, which correlates with our practice of 9 nights, which is a tradition. When someone has passed, you have 9 nights of grieving and seeing the body and people bringing food to the family. So it was interesting seeing that the correlation between the celebration of life and also the celebration of death. So this series is called Crownings, and I wanted to sort of honor their labor. And I took a lot of stereotypical images of washerwomen and market women and sort of flipped it and gave them the power to birth babies and sort of changed the way that they've been stereotyped. I did a residency at the Women's Studio Workshop, and I had been making molds of hands in a catching position, like as in delivering babies. And I found out that I could make paper sculptures, which was really awesome. And paper making is just like a new love now. So I made pulp out of birthing cloths and red raspberry tea. And then I cast them into the hand molds that I'd had. And using the same pulp, I was really interested in the fact that midwives still exist. Nano midwives still exist in Jamaica, but you have to know somebody who knows somebody because it's considered illegal to practice because they're not certified by a medical board. And I noticed that when you're making paper, you're pulling the paper on a decal, which looks like the screen of a window, basically, and you push that layer of paper down, and then you're supposed to pull again and push it down onto that first sheet. And I was just like, oh, wow, I can put things in between these. So I decided to hide the midwives within the sheets of paper that could only be revealed on this X-ray box. And the box pulses almost like you were taking a breath. And then on the paper, I embossed some of the medicinal herbs used by the midwives. One of the things that's really interesting about the midwives is that they were, when slaves were bought from Africa, they were able to identify a lot of the herbs that were growing in various places like throughout the Caribbean. Their knowledge of botany was far more advanced than Europeans that had come there. So they were able to cure certain diseases or viruses and illnesses while white doctors were still doing bloodletting, for example. And they were able to do things like provide abortions for women who were on plantations. Midwives were really powerful figures that are often rented out to other plantations to deliver their children. They nursed the ill and the sick on the plantation, not just the enslaved, but also slave masters. And they oftentimes thought that they feared them because they thought they practiced obia, which is like our version of voodoo, or what people here would call hoodoo. This is, again, these are the hands I ended up casting. One of the comments that I had heard was that that they thought that Nana midwives were dirty. So for this piece, it's called Pure. I decided to cast the hands of midwives out of black soap, and then allow the viewer to come and wash their hands with the hands of the midwives. And over the duration of time, this piece has kind of morphed a bit. So this was the installation of it that I did in Jamaica for the Jamaican Biennial. This is in Devon House, which is the first Black millionaire in Jamaica owned this home. And they asked me to do an installation in the bathroom. So this is what the bathroom would have looked like with the chamber pot and pitchers of water. And because it's a historical site, you can't actually have real water in it. So we put them on the wall. And also this was a really fun project because when I was leaving to go to Jamaica, JetBlue would not let me bring the furniture on the plane for some reason. So when I went to Jamaica, all I had was the soap hands, and they had to take me to the mall, and I just sort of winged it. And it was really fun. I really love site-specific stuff now that when I don't know what's going to happen, and it provides a lot of play. And I seem to work really good under pressure like that. So it became a much more fun project. So this was a piece of furniture. This is the bedroom that was connected to the bathroom. It had a vanity table there. So I decided to sort of make use of that. So this is yet another hand, and the Orisha Yemiya, or Erzali, depending on where you are, she is the Orisha of motherhood and a protector of women. So this was my offering to her. And pretty much everything that's there was originally there on the vanity. So the only thing that I've added was the hand, and the blue beads represent her. The snakes are also attributed to her, and then coins. She likes silver dimes often, and then the coconut. But the mirror is also something used to represent her, but it was already there in the combs. And, I just thought it was really, it was like a good marriage. Like I would have never thought to construct this, but the site sort of lent into it. And then another practice that we have in Jamaica is when a baby is born, you cut the navel string or the umbilical cord and you bury it in the ground with a fruit tree. And for the duration of your life, you are to take care of that fruit tree. And it binds you to your home. So you always know where your home is, and you're supposed to take care of it until it grows into a huge tree. So I did that with this. We have a fruit called a naceberry. So the hands are holding the naceberry, and it's connected to red beads that I just happened to bring with me going there. And it's connected to the scissors underneath the bed. So I had mentioned before about one of the practices was to put scissors under the bed to cut the labor pains. So just putting this in the installation, it was really interesting seeing, because there were still tours that were happening in the space as we were installing. So it was really interesting seeing the people's responses as they came through to see this. So I'm going to skip ahead to cyanotypes. I had been collecting articles on lionfish. They are an invasive species that are destroying parts of the Caribbean. They eat everything, and there's no natural predator on the side of the world. They're indigenous to the Indian Ocean. So we saw a lot of them in Mauritius. They are stunningly beautiful fish, but they have spines on them that are incredibly toxic and venomous and can kill you. If you were to get pricked by one, you would have to go to the hospital immediately. And I thought that they were a really great metaphor to talk about colonialism. They're an invasive species that's come and sort of destroyed aspects of the Caribbean and other parts of the world where colonizers have gone and, taken over. And I was really fascinated with the history of photography in relation to the Caribbean. Again, there are no images of slaves, so I decided to sort of create my own narrative. Cyanotypes are also used to capture the New World. So Anna Atkins was the first, one of the first photographers to capture images of like botanical seaweed. And I always loved her work. And also cyanotypes were used to create blueprints. And I'm very much interested in the planning that went into colonialism. So when I was doing a lot of this research, I was finding blueprints of slave castles, how to construct a slave castle. And I found lots of them. So from Goree Island all the way up and down the Gold Coast. Also, how to design manacles, how to build the proper slave ship, because you needed to fit a certain amount of bodies. There was like a regulated document on the regulation of slave ships and had all the bodies, mapped out. And I'm thinking, wow, you must be really psychotic to sit here and plan all of this. And, the effort that went into constructing all of this and making this happen is highly disturbing to me. I've been reading a lot about slave suicides of late. And one of the descriptions that I heard is like slaves would try to starve themselves on slave ships. So what happened is that they ended up inventing this metal contraption that would pull their mouths apart so that they could force feed the food into their bodies. Because if that slave died, that's merchandise that can no longer be used. So just really thinking about how we're commodifying these bodies, and they're not humans anymore, they're an object that, if it dies, it loses value. So a lot of these images are of lionfish in military formations. This one's a little more aggressive. They're kind of looking at the viewer. And I'm just sort of playing with the formations here. So this one, they're sort of all going vertically. And this one, they're coming on to the viewer. And again, I'm just thinking about them moving in formation together as a unit. And these are 60 by 44. They're not very big. So this is one of the larger ones I've done. It's called The Filthy Water Can't Be Washed. It's from my first solo museum show. And with this one, I was really interested in using two different kinds of lionfish that look exactly the same with the naked eye. Like if you didn't know, you would think it was the same kind of fish attacking each other. But I like the fact that they're indiscernible and that they do look the same, because I tend to focus a lot on British colonization, but there's French, Dutch, German, Italian. They all did the same thing. So with these, some are coming in a military formation and others are coming more in like a guerrilla formation. So you see them sort of popping up all over the place. And this piece is, I think, 20 feet. And this was an installation, still part of the show, called Sea Change. And I was interested in, what happens when you take a group of people from one location to the next. They're no longer what they once were. They become something else. Their languages change. The food that they eat, their traditions tend to change. There are retentions, but they're no longer the same. So with this, I have the lionfish morphing into sargassum seaweed, which is also an invasive species in the Caribbean. So the fins are starting to turn into the sargassum seaweed. Some of them are dying, some of them are trapped. And I think this was maybe like 200 prints. And I don't have a photo lab. I use my front porch to print everything. I have a half bathroom and I just coat the paper 2 at a time and let it dry on the toilet and in the shower. And I just print on the porch, and then I have a plastic kiddie pool that I wash everything out and then leave it on the porch to dry. So I'm really low tech. And again, ephemeral material, if you were to expose this in the sun, the cyanotype will turn white. And I really like that, like just the idea of exposing something and, it completely changing. And then I know if you were to put it in a book or something dark, the color will start to come back, which is pretty amazing. Like the chemical changes. And just learning.
Sorry,
Yeah,
can I ask a question in that process? I was just wondering about how long that takes you to amass, like in terms of like the scale of making all of these prints in a way in which you're kind of doing it at home and there's a chances for variation. So I guess it's two questions. Like, how long does that take? And do you get to do you start to learn ways of making variation and like pushing that? Or is it something that's always kind of constantly happening and surprising you?
It's all of it. This is based off of another cyanotype installation I tried to do. Like at first I was like, maybe I want to make this cyanotype print, but I feel like it should start from a corner. And then I started from the corner and I was like, my friend was like, no, you need to make it a little bit bigger. So then I did that. And then I was like, you know what? I think it should take a whole room. And when I thought about it, I was like, that looked awesome. But oh my God, the amount of work that went into it was a lot, especially because how restrictive working from home can be. But I'm always learning when I'm making work. Every new project I do, I force myself to learn a new skill set, because I can always reach back into that toolbox and use, that tool again. And, a lot of it is accidental. Like when I first started, I was like trying so hard to get all the blues to match. I was like, damn it, it's not exposing the same way. But, I'm lucky that I live in California where we have sunshine like 24/7. But, the sun exposes things differently in the wintertime than it does in the summer. So like I'm printing these in the summer super fast, like 2 minutes. In the winter, it'll take more like 5-6 minutes, depending on, how many clouds are in the sky. So there was no way I was going to match it. But then I felt like, those are parts of the ocean. And I used to try to get the paper smooth. I was like, yeah, buckles. And then I had a curator say, but that's how you make it. And it's referential to the fact that it's underwater. So like a lot of these things, like you're fighting, you just have to embrace it. I tried to approach it the way that I would watercolor in a way. I used to do a lot of watercolor paintings when I was in high school. And there's tricks like if you throw salt on it, you'll get like little white stipplings into the paint. So I was like, well, what would happen if I did that on this? So if you see little speckles in it, it's just salt. That orange little piece that's on the left, my dog stepped on because I have to dry it on the floor in my dining room. So I had baking soda around there. And when you print the cyanotype after you've washed it out, if you spray hydrogen peroxide on it, it'll show you what the true blue will look like once it's completely dry. So I usually do that to see if I need to reprint. And he stepped in the baking soda and then stepped on my print. So you can see like a little doggy footprint in it. And I was like horrified. I was like, no, but then it looked kind of good. So I kind of left the orange in there. I was like, oh, wow, this is a new method of doing this. If you spray hydrogen peroxide on it when the chemical is still wet, you also get this sort of like sea spray kind of look to it. So it's all experimentation. And it's one of the reasons why I love this medium so much, is because you can never get the same thing twice. It's unpredictable. It's fun. I learn a lot from it. I have learned so much. Like if you layer the negatives, you'll get, if you layer the negative, there will be a positive on the paper, but where they overlap will become a negative all over again. And, those weren't things that I noticed until one day I had a fish that got stuck, so it's all happy accidents, but it's fun. And from that, I can figure out how to use that. I always say that whenever I learn how to make something, I also want to learn how to destroy it, because it's that in between that's really fascinating of what you can and can't do. And just the middle area and how you can sort of use that and exploit that. So this covered the entire room. It's like 800 square feet. And when you view it, the lights are dim and the viewer, it kind of makes you feel like you're underwater. So I wanted the viewer to sort of feel engulfed in the work. I think that took me like at least 6 months to do. And then I had to make another one for Prospect, which is this is. So I was in Prospect 4. It's curated by Trevor Shoemaker. And this is the Robert E. Lee Monument in New Orleans before they took it down. And I was really fascinated with the fact that like the story that I heard was the contractor that they had hired to remove it. When the public found out who he was, they went to his home and set his Lamborghini on fire at night. So to take it down, they actually had to do it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Everyone had to be hooded. You couldn't see who was doing what. And they had to do it to protect, you know, the contractor and his workers. So all that's left is just the pedestal. And I'm really fascinated with these like monument discussions, because even if you remove the monument, we already know what was there. You know, like there's still a lot of context to it. I actually don't think they should remove the monuments. I think that they should stay there, and there should be some context, or if they've been vandalized, leave it there. The monument is there for the public. So if the public has a reaction to it, let it stay there. So I was really fascinated that I still know what was there. And it's kind of like there's a ghost there, and there's a haunting that, you know, you can remove it all you want, but, you know, we still know what happened. So I was in the Ogden Museum, and like literally next door to it was the Civil War Museum, and which I thought was funny because like I would sit outside and to see like who's actually going in there. I was really interested, like, well, why would you want to visit this? And it's really just a collection of things like, you know, there was this propaganda campaign, The Lost Cause. When the Civil War ended, the South, a lot of people had a really hard time with accepting that loss. So a lot of pretty much all of these monuments were built to sort of soothe their egos. There's a lot of propaganda, like Gone with the Wind was part of that. This ideal of the South being genteel is also a part of that. And I was really interested in the fact that like there's this building of this myth to comfort them. But it's still, you can do everything you want, but you're still haunted by that. So I created this piece. I don't have a lot of great photographs of this installation. This piece is called Spectre, because I was thinking a lot about that haunting, and reading T.J. Demos, who, you know, talked about post-colonialism, and his argument is that, you know, even if you do remove all of these things, the person who's created it, the city that's removed it, will always be haunted by what was once there. And I don't believe in post-colonialism. I think that colonialism still exists. It's just a different format at time. There's settlers colonialism. I was reading recently about trash colonialism. So in this one, there's very few lionfish. Some of them are ghosted. So it's very hard to see them. You have to really get up on the piece. And some of them are dead and floating and trapped in the sargassum seaweed. And it was in a smaller space. It was more intimate. It was about 400 or so square feet. And then with this one, I collaged on top of it. Again, happy accidents. The measurements they gave me were off, and the space was actually bigger than what I printed. So luckily I had extra prints, and I was like bursting into tears, crying like, oh my God, it's gonna suck. And a friend of mine came in and just suggested collaging. So, you know, you just really never know what's going to happen. And it ended up working out, I think, in my favor. This is for the Perez Museum that I showed 2 years ago. The show was about how we perceive the Caribbean in the future. And I thought a lot about the damage that colonialism has done to the family structure and psychologically what it's done to us. And one of those things is the relationships that we have with our family, particularly me. My dad doesn't speak to me. He doesn't know my child. I haven't spoken to him in like 7 years now. And his unwilling to accept the way that I live my life, that I'm an artist, things like that. And a lot of that has to do with generational trauma and the things that he experienced growing up in the Caribbean. And also just, when immigrants come to the country, they want better for their children, but they don't always allow you to have better. They think that you need to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer. There's like this funny joke, this meme that says West Indian kids can only be three things: a lawyer, doctor, engineer, and the fourth is failure to the family. And it's a joke because like we laugh out of the sheer pain of that being somewhat true. So I thought a lot about that. And then also thinking about the fact that we refer to the former colonizer as the mother country. And what happens when you try to assimilate yourself so much to that mother country, they still don't accept you. So in this video, I am attempting to dreadlock this barrister wig, but I'm continually failing over and over to do it. And I'm playing a poem by Derek Walcott that talks about the ending of relationships and learning to love yourself despite the fact that you have been rejected in this relationship. So I will play this video. And it's a 3-channel video, so it's, surrounding you on 3 different walls.
Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself.
The time will come when, with elation,
give wine, give bread,
greet yourself
give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you.
And each will smile at the
The
others
time
all
will
your
come
life
when
and say,
who you ignored
with
for
elation,
another,
eat.
who knows
You
you
will greet
by
yourself
heart.
arriving
You
will love
at
again
your
the
own
stranger
door.
who
Take down
was
the love
yourself.
letters
In
from
your
the
own
bookshelf,
Give
and
wine,
each will
give
smile
bread,
the photographs,
welcome.
the
Give back
desperate
your heart
notes,
to
and
itself.
say, peel
To
your
the
own
stranger who
image
has
from
loved
the
you
mirror.
all your
Eat.
life, whom you ignored
You
for
will love
another,
again the stranger who was
who knows
yourself.
you by heart. Take down the
Give
love letters
wine,
from the
give
bookshelf,
bread, give back your heart
the
to itself.
photographs, the desperate notes,
To the stranger who
peel
has
your
loved
own
you
image from the mirror.
all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life.
That is narrated by Jody Linke Chow, who is another really great performance artist from Jamaica. Oops. Almost done. So this is an installation for a show that I did at MOAD in San Francisco. The show was called Rum, Coffee, Gold, Sugar. I always mess up the title. And it was looking at the objects that cause the objects of colonialism, essentially. And of course, I was the sugar part. So initially, when I was installing this, I was thinking about the phrase, I swear on a stack of Bibles. So, I had this grand goal of like making a whole bunch of Bibles out of sugar and stacking them on top of each other. But realistically, that was not going to happen because I didn't have that much time to do this piece. But when I did, I cast about 100 pounds of sugar. And when I went to start putting it on the plinth to see how much more I needed, I was laying it out. And I kind of really loved the way that it looked, like the color variations. So I decided to sort of leave it like this. My husband said it looked like evidence, which I thought was kind of a cool observation. And again, these aren't, as an artist, you don't magically come up with these ideas. Sometimes it's just the input of other people that sort of like spark your mind. So I started to do that. And I was really thinking about religion in terms of like how it's impacted the Black diaspora. So religion was used to justify slavery. There's something called the Slave Bible, where slave masters in the South would give slaves Bibles in order to civilize themselves, since we were all primitive. And but they would redact the parts of the Bible that actually said that slavery was bad, because then they could use that as a tool against them. But religion was also used to be part of the civil rights movement. When you look at the history of the Black church and everything that it's done, there's a lot of Black churches. Like, I got my vaccine at a Black church. So there is a lot of community and galvanizing that happens around Black churches, thinking about how the Bible has been used to support homophobia. So some of the Bibles I have in there are twisted and bent around, the idea that there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, yet there isn't. So that's why I have the gavel in there. And then I decided to this was all experimentation. I thought I was just going to cast the Bibles, but I started playing around with beads and rice and thinking about how when enslaved people were brought into the Americas, they oftentimes hid their own religion with their own practices with Catholicism, for example. So some of the beads in there represent the various orishas that are signified by color. Women in parts of Brazil often hid grains of rice in their hair when they were brought there so that they could plant their own food. You can see that rice in parts of Brazil, and also in the South, like in the Carolinas near the Sea Islands, that rice is referred to as Carolina gold. And it's a very specific grain of rice. And actually there were some freemen from North Carolina that actually went to Trinidad and established themselves there. And I didn't really learn about them until a couple of years ago. They were called the Americas, and they actually planted that rice in Trinidad. Sorry, there was like a gnat in front of me. And they're the descendants of those people who came from North Carolina, and it grows wild in parts of Trinidad, which is like really amazing to me. And I would love to go do more research on that. So all of these things are imbued into the sugar. The coins represent offerings to orishas. Amazing Grace is something that's constantly sung in Black churches, especially during funerals. So I found a hymnal book while I was there, and just sort of as I'm casting the sugar, I just started stuffing things in there and just seeing what would happen, because I'd never done it before. It's all experimentation. So this was probably one of the most fun installations I've ever done. It was just like a pleasure to do it. I accidentally burnt some sugar, so there's super dark pieces that you see there. It's burnt sugar. I messed up this curator's kitchen with sugar all over the place. But yeah, it was fun. And then over the duration of the exhibition, it all melted and pooled together. This is from a solo show at my former gallery. They closed, unfortunately, due to COVID. Going back to the cyanotypes, I was trying to figure out a way to marry my sugar practice with my cyanotypes, and was thinking a lot about coral bleaching and the hand that we have in sort of destroying the environment, but also looking at corals as colonies. They are their own colony. They have tons of microorganisms that live in them. Other animals, fish feed on things that are trapped within the corals. Like, it's just, it's its own little country in its sense. And, we're destroying the corals because of, climate change and the water's warming. But if you were to give the coral enough time, if you were to leave them alone, they would regenerate on their own. And I didn't want to look at it in just a destructive way. Like, there is potential for this, growth of, regrowth of life. So for this, I decided to actually submerge the cyanotypes in sugar, and then allow the sugar to crystallize. So it's very much like how you make rock candy. You make this like simple syrup that's really condensed, and once you leave it alone, it will start to crystallize. And what I really liked about it is that it kind of shimmers like crystals that you'd see, like so it was really pretty. And then as we hung it up, I made sure that it was still a little wet, so that over the duration of the exhibition, some of the crystals start to fall off. And come to the ground. And then the way that I present it now is that we gather all the sugar that's fallen, and we, when we frame it, we build somewhat of like a shadow box and then put the sugar inside. And we always tell people, look, it's not going to be like this forever. It's a living piece. It's constantly evolving. The sugar is going to keep coming off. So buyer beware. But I do love that. I love that. I love that it has its own life. Like it literally has its own life. So these are some more installation shots. The one on the left is called the Litany for Survival. And with this one, instead of submerging it in the sugar, I decided to paint aspects of the coral with the sugar. So here's a detail.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Andrea, can I, as we're to have this image up, can I ask a question from a student?
Sure.
I'm so impressed by your process as an artist and how you adapt to your circumstances and the information you acquire. The evidence of your existence in your work, whether incidental or intentional, strengthens the message you're conveying about the truth and the unseen. I'm curious about how you view your art in terms of what they are. They seem to be more experiences and instances rather than static objects that have a final point in their existence, whereas your pieces keep evolving. How do you document such complex art in a professional representation and in a way that's inclusive of everything you make convey?
That was a very well-written question.
The student writes particularly well-written questions and asks
really articulate students. Mm-hmm. I'm always impressed. Like some of the students, I'm like, damn, they're way smarter than me. Documentation, I'm really just photographs and letting them exist in the photographs. And again, it's just, I view it as living, and I view them as like, stepping stones or learning tools for me as an artist. Like, I don't want to be an art star. Like, I want to continually grow. Like I it's a privilege that I get to do this, you know? So everything that I make, I want it to inform the next body of work, even if it's not necessarily the exact same subject matter. And I used to really worry that the work looked too disparate. But I do think now, like having the chance to sort of step back, like I do kind of see my hand as a continuation in the work. And like whatever concept I have, it's always concept first. And I think about what material would go best with that concept. And sometimes it just brings me back to a material that I've always used. Like I've been working with sugar since 2007 and learning from it. Like I didn't know how to crystallize sugar until I did this. It's a lot of reading and research and like chemistry and science. So, you know, it's me constantly having to learn along the way. What was the other part of that question that really?
I think it's some of the things that you've spoken to, the idea of the not so much of a static object, but do you think of these as experiences and less about sort of like the static object?
Yeah, I mean, I want the viewer to feel like that. And again, like I see them as living things. Like I definitely don't see them as static because they do constantly change. And as a collector, you got to be willing to live with that. You know, if you don't, maybe it's just not for you. And I'm okay with that. It's just not for you. And again, it's kind of my way of like avoiding things like having my work flipped. Like the worst case scenario to me is to ever see my work on auction. Like I would hate to see that because I just think that would lose the essence of the piece and it would really destroy the concept of the work. So yeah, I like that it always changes. I don't think that culture is a static thing. It constantly changes. So I think that is what my love of ephemerality is, you know, it's a reflection of culture. And, you know, how boring would life be if we were all this very static culture that never changed or anything like that. So I kind of look at it that way. Like I let the materials and how I make things reflect my personal views on culture or the environment, etc.
Yeah, that's very much answered like things about that question for me about I love that answer. Right. About what feels
That was a
static,
good question.
especially also like when you're dealing with conditions of history and of archive and sort of like the static sense of sort of images that are frozen that you're already sort of like taking people out from and liberating from that kind of staticness. There's something that feels like a kind of poetry in that, and then kind of continuing on to sort of like thinking about how that might be applied to other kinds of materials.
The other thing is that, like, you know, archivalness is like, ha ha ha. If you're on the islands, you know, you have to deal with things like humidity. So like archiving things there is an extreme challenge. So like I used to really worry a lot about it, but you know, if I lived on either of those islands, this would be a constant struggle. They don't always have the technology and equipment to archive things the way that they want to. Like when I was in Mauritius, for example, we went to the archives and it was an industrial area with like windows that had slats in them so you couldn't completely close them.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually let people touch these 100 of years old paper and gave them gloves as an option. And I was like horrified. I was like, oh my God, don't touch a paper. But this is the reality of what they have to deal with. They had one machine that was donated to them by some conservationists from China that showed them how to conserve some of the paper. But prior to that, they were laminating like these old documents. And I was just like, I
saw that when I was in the Caribbean. I was like, oh my God, laminated.
Yeah, like the archives in Jamaica are scary, and like they're not always organized in the best way. Like I've heard that there's one woman who knows where everything is, but the minute she retires, it's a wrap. Like good luck trying to find it. And it's not like a lack of care. It's just that how do you, like, that's not the absolute most important need at this time. You know, they're fighting to have their own economy, and they're working against superpowers like the US and the UK in order to establish their own independent economy and not have to worry about like food insecurities. Or, you know, as soon as the price of gas goes up in Jamaica, like they've had riots and protests. So an archive is really not the main focus right now. So when I'm making work, I constantly think about that too. Like how could I make something? And it's one of the reasons why I don't work with materials like oil paint. I work with everyday materials that anybody could use to make work. Like cyanotype chemicals, like literally $24 on the internet. Mm-hmm. It's not expensive at all. And I noticed also that a lot of focus on work that I've seen in the Caribbean has been a lot of printmaking and like dope printmaking. And it's because like they don't necessarily have to worry about, you know, you still have to worry about like mold on paper, but you're not having to think about the humidity slowing the drying time of your oils, you know? And those materials are super expensive because it's all imported. So I'm trying to think about also like what is accessible, and all of these things are accessible to anybody. It's one of the reasons why I work pretty low tech, is because I want to be inclusive and like make people have access to the work with the materials that I use. Like everybody knows what sugar is, but do you think about where it came from and what it costs to have it get to where you are and for it to be so incredibly cheap now? And same thing with like a banana. How is it that you have a banana in Massachusetts in wintertime? You know, there's no bananas, no banana plantations growing.
Trade policy and production.
Exactly.
We have one last question from a student, and I know that some people have had to go. Their classes have started, so people who are hanging out probably don't have class. Thank you so much. It's been amazing hearing you talk about joy and experimentation and play, and your work feels really important at a moment in which we have really had to lean on experimentation even more so than usual. I actually have been soaking cyanotypes in salt water this semester, and my apartment is a zone of chaos most days. The way that you talk about materials feels so collaborative, and I'm wondering if there's if that's the way that you see your process. I know, or do you think about kind of collaborativeness in your process, even though it might not be in the necessary? But you talked about also working with a researcher. So
yeah, but that was a terrible experience. we're no longer friends. So let's just put it that way. Academics don't always respect artists. So I'm gonna just leave it like that. I don't know. I'm kind of like, I'll skip to like, blah, 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 blah. This project. So I couldn't physically make this. I felt more like a project manager. And that was really, really hard because I can't always articulate what I want. Like you have the vision in your head, but to articulate it to another person who can understand that or sees that vision is so challenging. This is the largest sculpture I've ever made and like the hardest thing I've ever tried to make because I felt like I had no control of any of it. Like like the outside of it is all cyanotype. I just luckily found somebody online who sells pre-coated fabric. You just tell her what kind of fabric you want and she like has it already. And that was the only way that this was going to work. And then I just printed it in my backyard, but I had to depend on someone else who could sew this because I couldn't do it. I can't sew anything. I just break needles. And I don't have an industrial sewer, which is a sewing machine, which is what you need in order to do this. So just the fact that I had to depend on someone else is like my worst nightmare. And I feel like as an artist, there's this pressure for you to go big all the time. And, you know, that's my biggest struggle is learning how to think big. I don't want to make it big just for the sake of making it big. I want it to be a big concept that if it needs to be a bigger scale, then I can do that. But it's really hard because I feel like I'm giving up control. Like I can't put my hand in it. It sucks. I made that little boat that's there, and I printed this as the cyanotypes.
And I made a wayfinding show, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering. I'm so glad that you talked about this just before we leave because I was so curious about how this was made and assembled. And I was even wondering, how did you think of what's the modeling for the structure?
So I wanted to make a planetarium. We had to make a piece based on their maps collection, and they had these like 15th century maps, and they had these like really ridiculous drawings of sea monsters, which I thought were hilarious because they were so dumb. Like they didn't know what whales were, so they just drew some like they clearly didn't have an artist on board. And they were hilarious. And then I found out that they were used as like warnings for like primitives or like bad waters, like these waters are really rough or whatever, or treacherous. And I was like, oh wow, they had warning. I wonder what that would have been like if we had warning about what was going to happen, like all these colonizers coming in and like, you know, destroying families and stuff. So I wanted to make a warning symbol for us. And I was thinking a lot about how like they depended on these like poorly drawn maps that were all wrong and everything like that, because they still believe the world was flat. But Muslims and other people in various parts of the continent use the stars. Like the Chinese had star maps, and that's how they navigated around the world. And they were far more advanced with their navigation. So I wanted to use like projections of, like, I wanted the cyanotypes to look like stars. And I'm projecting, their warning is not just the stars, but also I projected the trade winds, because without the trade winds, those ships would not have been able to sail to the Americas. So that's their warning. And I remember reading once about how, I can't remember where in Africa it was, but it was probably on the Swahili coast, but they looked at Orion, and then there was another star with it. And I think there was a supernova that happened. So that star died. And the fact that that star dimmed and was no longer there, they saw that as a warning, which I thought was really interesting. Like how the perception of, the destruction of like a star could make you think, okay, something bad is going to happen. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I wanted to do the same thing with the projections. So, you go into the planetarium and you're looking up, and the sky and the water meet. And I wanted it to be that, you're in the waters, and then you notice something in the sky. So like there's an audio with, it's my son actually saying, what's that over there? You know, who's that? And he's supposed to be like pointing at the projection, and they spin around the way they would in a planetarium, which was a really challenging thing to figure out how to make. But yeah, so I wanted the geodesic dome to really make it feel a lot like a planetarium, and also just thinking about like the science of, I mean, I'm a nerd when it comes to like anything having to do with space. My husband works for NASA, so I'm like, so I like that it looks like mathematical and scientifical, and those aren't things that are always attributed to the continent or anywhere else that isn't Europe.
Thank you so much for such a generous talk and for answering questions at the end. I know we've gone over a bit today. Does anybody have any last thoughts or questions that they would like to ask Andrea? Okay. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. And
Thanks. No, thank you for inviting me and finding another fellow Caribbean. It's always good. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that you were there. Like, get all excited.
Well, it was funny. I was thinking you were talking about making art as being a privilege. And I remember talking to my dad. My dad's family's Caribbean. And one time I was having like this sort of like woe is me moment about how hard it is to be an artist. This was a few years ago. And he was like, it's a privilege to be an artist, to have people listen to how you see the world.
Exactly.
Right? Like we don't take moments all the time to listen to how people view the world and see the world and what they want to add into a conversation about it. Like that's a really beautiful thing. And it's a privilege to be in that position. So
I think artists sometimes forget that, because I think in some ways we have to be somewhat self-centered, but we shouldn't be that self-centered. Because I mean, like, we're making work, but we're not like, let me find the cure for COVID. You know what I'm saying? Then I will be obnoxious as hell, like, oh, you can't tell me shit. But I'm just making artwork. So the fact that I get to do this, and I can pay bills, you know, I see it as a privilege. And it's fun. I get to do the thing that I love the most.
Yeah. It's a good note to end on, the idea of the play, the things that we love to do, and letting go of the rest of the sort of art worlding stuff that doesn't feel as good. All right. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thanks.
All right. I'll sign off to everybody. Bye.